Olá, começa agora mais um episódio da sexta temporada do EsferaCast, o videocast que dá o tom aos assuntos de maior destaque do país. Eu sou o jornalista Marcio Gomes, da CNN Brasil, e entrevistei durante o Diálogos Esfera em Nova York o pesquisador Thaddeus Pawlowski, diretor do Centro para Cidades e Ambientes Resilientes da Universidade de Columbia.
It's a proven fact that we watch all over the world as communities rebuild after disasters and neighbors helping each other. That is how communities are resilient. So that's a really important first step. I would strongly recommend that, is to convene all the leaders. And those leaders also have to be neighborhood level leaders too. You have to get the community voices at the table from the beginning.
Ele foi o responsável pela reconstrução de Nova York depois do furacão Sandy e deu sugestões para a recuperação do Rio Grande do Sul. Vale lembrar que este episódio está em inglês e você pode conferir as legendas em português assistindo ao vídeo.
Professor, what it means for a city to be resilient against climate events?
Yeah. This term resilience is one that we like to use in urban planning more and more these days because of the challenges we're facing in cities all over the world with climate change and with the other crises we're facing. And resilience is a word, it means different things in different disciplines. So in psychology, when a person is resilient, they overcome great hardship. And that's kind of what a city can also be resilient. It can discover strength and fortitude and grit and powers that wouldn't have otherwise been there by facing challenges. It's a hard thing to talk about in the wake of a disaster, because when someone's really suffering, you don't want to say, hey, be more resilient. But it's a proven fact that we watch all over the world as communities rebuild after disasters and neighbors helping each other. That is how communities are resilient. So cities can be resilient just like people. And that's largely because communities, families, neighbors are resilient with each other.
The superstorm Sandy hit New York very badly in 2012. I ask you, if you are talking about resiliency, how was the city before and after Sandy?
Yeah. Well, the city was doing well, before Sandy. And that's an important distinction because oftentimes disasters sort of magnify ongoing trends. So if a place is in decline, people want to move away. Mm-hmm. The city was doing really well in lots of ways, but it had a lot of really significant challenges. So the challenges were affordable housing, and the challenges were also just adapting to climate change. So those two things, housing and climate change, like really thinking about our infrastructure and how it could be better adapted to climate change, those came to the fore after Hurricane Sandy. So that's one. We were doing well. We knew we had trouble. We knew that the city after September 11th, I should say, when Mayor Bloomberg came into office, there was like a real identity crisis. Like, how can New York rebuild itself to be like the center of global capitalism? And so much of what you see behind us here happened.
The mic.
Oh yeah, happened in the Bloomberg years. Hudson Yards and this big economic development push that kept business in New York, and it made a very strong economic growth, but it wasn't for everybody. So then we had like Occupy Wall Street in 2011. And there was more concern that like not everybody was doing well. And so that Hurricane Sandy, like all disasters, really show that some people are going to suffer a lot, and some people are going to be left behind. And so that was one thing that we learned right away after Hurricane Sandy. I mean, for those who didn't already know, that we have a very unequal city. And so that was one of the great challenges.
And usually the poor people suffer more.
Oh, that's always true with every disaster, everywhere, unfortunately. And that's going to be the case with more and more climate change. Mm-hmm. So if we want to be really proactive about climate change, it means addressing some of the underlying fragilities in our infrastructure, in the way that we plan and build the city, so that it's more equal for everyone, better quality of life for everyone.
And was it expensive to prepare New York for new climate events? And
yeah,
it's done. Is it done?
Well, no, it's not going to be done right away. This city of nearly 9 million people and 1 million plus buildings and enormous, 600 miles of coastline and 600 subway stations and so many miles of subway lines and so much infrastructure, 12 power stations, 10 sewer treatment plants. All this infrastructure was built 100 years ago, more or less. Like most of those million buildings were built like 100 years ago. So to remake them all is going to take many generations. And the city has changed a lot in the last 10 years, but in the next 20, I think it will change much more than that. Each successive disaster causes us to change things more, but the city has, and that's one of the you asked me what resilience is. That a key characteristic of resilient people and resilient cities is embracing change, knowing that what we have today isn't what we need for the future, because we can look to the future and see that our climate is changing. We're getting a lot more rainfall in the future. The sea level is rising in New York Harbor. It's risen a foot over the last century, but it's going to rise 2 more feet in the next 30 years, 2 or 3 more feet. Could be more. Every time they revise the projections, it goes up. So with this 600 miles of coastline and this rising sea level, it means all these coastal neighborhoods, they're going to have to change. And it's not an immediate process. So after Hurricane Sandy, we had $18 billion of federal recovery money to spend.
$18 billion.
Yes. And we spent all that money. I worked in the mayor's office on housing recovery, and we rebuilt about 5,000 houses by elevating them up above the floodwaters. This is a really important thing to do. If you want to keep a house where it is after it floods and you want to make it safe, you put it up on concrete, we call them, piers.
Yeah.
And so we actually took these small homes, we call them bungalows. They're little stick-built homes, for a single family, and then put them up on very solid foundations that will probably be there in 1,000 years, long after the house is gone, these major concrete foundations. So that's one way we spent a lot of money after Hurricane Sandy. But there were other bigger successes, I would say, in infrastructure. The subway system, they rebuilt right away. All of our subway system, or most of it, is underground. So the tunnels flooded, had to pump them out, replace all the electrical infrastructure. That was a big job, but it happened right away because that's like the lifeblood of the city, getting the transportation infrastructure up and running.
Yeah.
Power came back pretty easily. So the hard infrastructure was easier to rebuild than the housing.
But now in Brazil, in Rio Grande do Sul state, after the tragedy, where do we start?
Yeah.
Rebuilding cities, convincing authorities about what to do, or explaining to some people that they will no longer be able to live in the place they were, where they were. They had to move.
Yeah.
Where do we start?
Oh my, that last one is very sensitive, and that's a hard place to start. But that's a necessary conversation. I think I can just give you the New York City experience because
sure.
I think we did some things well and some things not so well. We did a lot of planning after the storm. Like within days of the storm, the mayor had convened experts from many sectors to make a report about what happened, what exactly happened. Was this climate change? Was our infrastructure unprepared? Was our emergency management system ill-prepared? It turned out that our hospitals and nursing homes were really unprepared, and they spent billions of dollars of their own money. That's beyond the $18 billion to rebuild the hospitals. We have a lot of hospitals on the waterfront on First Avenue, and they built these massive submarine doors and all kinds of other things to harden so that they're ready for flooding in the future. So that report laid out our goals, like as a citywide goals. So that's a really important first step. I would strongly recommend that, is to convene all the leaders. And those leaders also have to be neighborhood level leaders too. You have to get the community voices at the table from the beginning. So that could be, I'm not sure what the equivalent is in Brazil, but certainly like the local mayors of these towns. But even, block captains or like neighborhood leaders, religious leaders, are very important, because they're very close to the ground. People also, we had a lot of emerging leaders after Hurricane Sandy we had people who were just moms or teachers or local entrepreneurs who just opened their doors and said, I'm going to help everyone that needs help. And so at a very local level, they took care of each other. And those people are really instrumental in the long-term recovery. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I think we could have done better in New York is to put more resources directly to them. So if we could use some of that $18 billion and give it right to the community leaders, I think to build very local community infrastructure. So I'm talking about like a shelter for people in the event of a storm, or solar panels on the roof of a school so that place would be all right as a shelter when the power goes down. Or one of the things that we spent a lot of money on is flood control infrastructure in various forms, both gray, like seawalls and berms, and green, rain gardens, restoring wetlands, other ways to hold water on green roofs and in public spaces. So those can also be very locally led, and we can find ways to give the money directly to the local people who can implement those projects.
So after all, you said, we can survive climate change, but it's expensive.
It's very expensive, but it's more expensive not to do anything.
Not to do anything.
Right. I don't know what the estimates of the damage will be for this current disaster, but it sounds like many thousands of homes have been destroyed and probably potentially billions of dollars of infrastructure just lost. So that's just one event, but many events over time for the whole country of Brazil will mean being proactive now will save you a lot of money. Our federal emergency management agency makes this estimate that $1 of what they call mitigation, meaning like proactive work to build our infrastructure ahead of time, will result in $8 of savings in recovery. Yeah. And but if you think of that on the personal level, like how much more peace of mind people would have had at Hurricane Sandy if their house was elevated, or if they had an evacuation plan and an evacuation place, if they had the money in their pockets to be able to rebuild their lives, or even if their employer was able to get right back up and running right away so they wouldn't be out of work for months. All those things, we can do those things ahead of time. We can make a plan for the employer, continuity of operations, infrastructure, etc.
Thanks a lot, Professor.
Yeah, okay.
It was a pleasure.